Getting colorful. Anytime you use the eyedropper tool, you want to make sure it is not taking a point sample. Sometimes a stray bright or dark pixel will throw off what you're trying to measure. So let's get a few colors from this image. I'll just click on the foreground swatch, and then that brings up the color picker. You'll notice that the sample size is set to point sample. And that may look like it's doing the right job, but I'm wanting to get some of the pink of this petal here, but I'm just getting these kind of white colors. So we'll change this to 5x5 average, then I'll click, and that's the color I was looking for. Once we've found a color that we like, we can press Add to Swatches and give it a name. And then we can go on creating more swatches. Let's take a sample of the sky and add that to the swatches as well. And how about one more? And then I'll just press OK to get out of the color picker. You'll notice that the foreground color has stayed the last color that we sampled. We can go over to the swatches panel here and see the swatches we just added at the bottom of the pile. With the swatches panel, you can press the plus to create a swatch, and after you've collected a bunch of swatches, you can use the folder to organize them. You can also import and export swatches from the hamburger menu. To help organize these swatches, we can create a folder for them. Just click the folder button and give it a name, and then you can drag the swatches into it. We can also load swatches that other people have made for us. Go to the hamburger menu and choose Import Swatches. These are ACO and ASE files that I downloaded from the Dan Edwards website. And it's all of the paint colors that they have available. ASE is a special format for InDesign, but Photoshop can open either one. And you'll notice our swatches panel has a new set of swatches in it. Perfect Palette 2023. Now if we scroll through it, we can see all of the paint colors. Well, that's lovely and all, but how are we going to know which one is which? Because mostly paints have names to them, and that's how we can refer to them. Well, we can look at those names. Just once again, go to the hamburger menu, and instead of a thumbnail, let's change it to a small list. And there we go. We have the color and the name, and that must be an internal code that Dan Edwards uses to refer to that color. The options bar for the gradient tool won't give you all the options you need, so you'll need to work with the gradients panel to edit the colors and transparency of your gradients. To create a gradient, first we have to choose the gradient tool. Then we can go up to the options bar and browse the presets up here. In the basics folder, we have the first two, which will change depending on what the foreground and background colors are. The first one is the foreground to the background color. The second one is the foreground to transparent. And then the third one is a good old standby black to white. So let's choose black to white from now. And let's look at the different types of gradients that we can create. With this first option here, this will create a linear gradient. And you just drag from one side to the other, and it will create the gradient for you. You can also reposition these later. And the nice thing is that these will stay editable, so you don't have to go and recreate the gradient and choose colors again. It will remember how you set up this gradient and allow you to change it later. This is something that Photoshop has changed in the last 2 years. So this is definitely a better way of working with gradients than we've ever had before. And then if we decide we don't want a linear gradient, we could change it to something else. For instance, the second option produces a radial gradient. And right now it's a little too big, so let's put that like that, and we'll just drag it in. There we go. Now it's currently drawing a perfect circle, but what if we wanted a flattened circle or an ellipse? We can go to this little pointer here and drag it in, and now we have an ellipse. And you can change the orientation of the ellipse by moving the other little piece on this gradient picker. And then from the center, we can choose where it is actually positioned. Alrighty. The third one is the angle gradient. Similar controls. And so a lot of design will like set this angle up so it's in the corner like that. It's just, it's a design, it's a choice. This is the reflected gradient. And basically anything that you drag out on one side, it's going to do on the other side. So you can get a nice reflected effect using this. And then finally we have the diamond gradient, which is like the oval gradient or the elliptical gradient, only it produces a diamond instead of an oval or a circle. So what if we want to use our own colors to create gradients? Are we stuck with just changing from the presets? Oh, no, of course not. But we do have to go to the gradients panel to do that. And from here, we can just click on the plus, and that brings up the gradient editor. This works a little bit differently than you think it might. We have two little color swatches here, and then we have two other color swatches at the bottom. And you'd think, what the heck is going on here? Well, turns out the top is the opacity. So currently, we have this going from 100% opaque to 100% opaque. And then we have black and white on the bottom. So the bottom is where we actually choose the colors. And we can go here, click on the color well, choose a color, click on the other side, color well, and pick another color. And then if we want to add a third color, we can just click on the bottom here, and that'll add another color in the color bar we have here. And then we can go to color well again and change that. Not sure that's good. Okay, so maybe, yeah. There we go, I like that. Okay. And then these little things in between the color swatches are the midpoint. So this is where the swatches are being evenly mixed. You can change the position of that closer to one or closer to the other by moving that one. So you can fine-tune it however you want. And let's take a look at this, the opacity. So for this one, it'll start with 100%, and then let's make it fade out to not 0, but maybe 80%. Okay, so now we have a gradient that's going to fade out and allow the background to show through. All right, and now all we have to do is name it, Marty's Gradient, and press New. And that adds it to our presets that are available. Once you're done, press OK. And let's open my layers palette. Oh, we're going to learn a technique. So if we have a gradient and we want to put another gradient on top of it, we can go ahead and press Shift and draw out another gradient. And that'll add it on a layer. So now we want to change our gradient to the one we just created. So we'll find it from our presets here. There it is. And we can move it around. And for this one, let's change it to another radial gradient. We'll make it just smaller. And then let's reverse it. There we go. And you can see, because that transparency, part of the gradient below it is showing through. So let's try a fun exercise using the gradient tool. It's called Blob Man. Here are the instructions for the first part of the Blob Man exercise. I'll go over these steps one by one in Photoshop. So let's create the Blob Man. Click on the blue New File button, and then we'll go to the Photo tab, choose Default Photoshop Size, and there's only one setting we need to change. Instead of white, we want to make the background black. Click Create, and there we go. We have a black canvas. Now we'll choose the Gradient tool, and we'll set it to black and white. And then since we want it to be white to black instead, we can click on this little checkbox for reverse. And make sure that we have the radial gradient selected. We'll draw the first gradient, which will make the Blob Man's body. And we can reposition it so it's kind of in the center. All right, that's good. Now we're going to use our trick to create a gradient on top of this gradient. So I'll hold down Shift on my keyboard, and let's make an arm for him. So I'll just make something a little smaller. But you'll notice something. Wait, what happens to the other gradient? Well, it turns out the gradient takes the entire layer. However, because we're going white to black, we can use a special blending mode so that when we add our gradients, they will kind of interact with each other in interesting ways. So let's change the blending mode here. Instead of normal, let's choose lightened. And this produces an interesting effect where the two gradients are kind of melting into each other. And then since we have this perfectly set up, why don't we just Command J or Control J on the PC to jump that to a new layer. The nice thing about doing that is that it keeps the blending mode. So instead of copying and pasting, we're going to jump it to a new layer, which will allow us to keep the blending mode as well as the gradient. Then obviously we can resize the gradient. And I'm just going to go through and really quickly produce some arms for him. And some legs. And maybe we'll give him some ears. All right, now he looks wonderful and hideous. Now that we have our Blob Man created, let's make him look a little more chaotic. Or wonderful, whatever you prefer. Here are the instructions we'll follow, and I'm going to switch into Photoshop. So let's tidy this up a bit. We'll go to Select and choose All Layers, and then we'll put that in a folder. And I'll name that Blob Man. Now that we have it in a folder, let's make that a smart object. I'll go to Filter and Convert for Smart Filters. And there we go. Now, let's apply a filter to this. And this will be non-destructive since we're working with a smart object. I'll go to Filter and Filter Galleries. And then let's choose the plastic wrap. And you can see we can change some settings here to kind of modify how this works. Almost anything is going to produce a good result. Just find something that works good for you, and then hit OK. Now let's add some color. He's kind of black and white. So let's move him into the 1950s. We will go to Image and Adjustments and Hue and Saturation. Now for this, we want to colorize him. So we'll click on the Colorize button here, and then we can choose an appropriate color. I think my guy is a little green, and maybe we'll pump up the saturation a bit. That's looking good to me. I'll press OK. Now for the final part of this, once again, we'll go to Filter, go to Distort, and Wave. Okay. And we can play with these sliders a bit. Let's get something that looks a little less chaotic, but definitely has some kind of organic shapes going on. So we can play with the wavelength and the amplitude. And these sliders change settings that we can randomize. So between these settings, it will randomize the wave effect. So I think with amplitude, we kind of want to dial that in so it's smaller numbers. With wavelength, we can play with that a bit until we get something that is looking kind of nice. And so we don't have perfect ovals here anymore. Kind of wavy. All right. And then once we get those settings in place, if you don't like the exact effect it's creating, you can click Randomize, and it will randomize, surprisingly, how it is applying these settings you've chosen. So I think that might be interesting. So I'll go ahead and press OK, and there we go. There is our Blob Man in his wonderful blobbiness. Now that we have our Blob Man created, let's save him. And then to submit this assignment, we'll just be taking JPEGs. So here's how we'll create a JPEG. Go to File, Export, and Save for Web Legacy. We'll just use the JPEG High preset, and we can see what it looks like. Sometimes it will fill more of the screen, so you can use these boxes here to zoom in or zoom out. So it looks good. It doesn't look like a JPEG is giving us any artifacts. So I'll press Save, and it creates a Blob Man, but instead of a space, it has a little hyphen here. That's because on the web is allergic to spaces. So in order to have a name that is compatible with how websites work, Photoshop helpfully changes any space to a character that will not cause confusion. And then just press Save and go ahead and submit that JPEG.